everyone. Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. I figured why not just do a chat, a little Q&A. I did write down a few standard questions or things I'd like to talk about. How long can I keep adding fruit to my vinegar? I would say up to about maybe for the first week. 2 weeks tops. I wouldn't keep adding after 2 weeks for certain, especially if it's got sugar in it. Because when it hits that 2-week mark, that's when it's converted most of the sugars to alcohol. And you don't want to keep adding sugar, anything with sugar. So, I mean, if it's herbs, that's one thing. But if you're adding things that have sugar in it, you're going to prolong that process. So I say the safest time would be within the first week. So I usually only go maybe a few days. I'll add stuff in there. Unless it's herbs that have no sugar in them, then I don't mind adding more after that point. Sometime when you have nothing better to do, Google the topical uses of water kefir. Huh. Never thought about that. That's interesting. Hopefully, let me write that down. I've thought about possibly getting back into water kefir. I don't know if I still have my grains. I might have froze them. Sometimes you can freeze those and get them to reactivate. I wasn't crazy about it. It didn't have a bad flavor. I didn't mind the flavor. I just didn't like it as much as the sodas I make from my fermentation starter, which, by the way, I decided to start a honeysuckle one just for fun. There's one I haven't started yet. I've made honeysuckle vinegar and honeysuckle cold infusion. And let's see, the other thing I got started a couple days ago was quote unquote sourdough. You could call it sourdough starter. I use my fermentation starter to get these going. If I just feel like doing a little bit of sourdough, then I'll just start fresh. And because the fermentation starter is already bubbly and active, it doesn't take long to get it going. But I'll just keep adding a little flour to it each day. Today I added a little flour and some water and a little more of the fermentation starter. For that one, what starter did I use? The dandelion one. Oh, and I was going to talk a little bit more about cold infusions. Some people didn't know what that meant. I did a video, I think, last year where I covered a bunch of different cold infusions. And it can be out of anything you want. It doesn't have to be honeysuckle. It can be, one of my other favorites is holy basil. Holy basil I do like, but I don't really care for it as a hot tea. To me, it seems, even if you're real careful with it, to me, it loses that flavor. And which I find disappointing, but as a cold infusion, it doesn't. It makes an excellent cold infusion. Sometimes I'll even mix it with some catmint, especially if I need some calming. Obviously, peppermint makes a good cold infusion, but I usually save that for a hot tea. The mint that I typically will use is the mojito mint, since I get tons and tons and tons of that. So if I'm going to make a minty cold infusion, I like using the mojito mint for that better than the peppermint. And then the peppermint better for a hot tea. What else? The orange mint and lemon balm. I like that both as a hot tea and really, really good as a cold infusion. So if you're wondering, well, what is that? Well, hot tea is a hot infusion. So the difference is this one's hot. You're heating it up. You know, you're letting it either simmer a little bit depending on what you're using, or you're just pouring your hot water over it and then letting it steep. Whereas a cold infusion, you just shove your stuff in a jar, pour some water over it, and then stick it in the fridge overnight. And then, so the next day it's had all night to infuse. And the next day it's good and cold. You can use just lemon balm. You can make it out of whatever you want. Whatever your favorite herb is to have as a tea, you can make it as a cold tea or a cold infusion. Same thing. One thought that hit me today is I love thyme tea, fresh thyme tea. And I'm like, I haven't done that one as a cold infusion. So hopefully, I'm going to write this down. Hopefully I remember to get one of those going. That stain remover, I made that short. It was from an older video. And I'm going to actually delete that video because I have a new video coming up, especially when I realized I mentioned, because I don't say what that stain is. I cut that part out. That's that stain in that little short. That's from the CS. So my countertop right now is Formica. I really want to go with either like granite or like I said, I still would love to have an oak one like Patrick made for in here, but I just noticed the Formica is wearing thin in places, and the color of it, because it's kind of a medium green color, and it's just real. That's why one of the reasons why I had Patrick make that big board for me in the kitchen where I typically am standing for my videos. And that's where I make all my bread on there. Anything I'm going to roll out goes on that. That's what that board's for. It's not supposed to be a cutting board. Because I noticed like the Formica's wearing, it's like, that's just probably getting in my food. And so anyway, so coming back to the stain remover, somebody asked, well, could I use that on granite? What would I recommend for granite? Well, if you got a stain on your granite, try the same thing. It shouldn't be any different using the peroxide and baking soda blend on anything like that. But it's just like I said, depending on what you're using it on, you want to be a little bit careful because it can have a pretty powerful bleaching effect. So you don't want to leave it on anything for too long. But yeah, that stain remover should work on any kind of countertop. And then another thing, what was it? Lilies. So I love Daylily flowers. They're so tasty, and I love the way they have that nice crunch to them, especially at the base. But what I do is if I'm not going to use them fresh in a salad or even I've added them to stir fries. And I have a video, by the way, on the benefits of daylilies. Anyway, so I dehydrate them up, all of the extra I'm not going to eat right away. And then I add them to my mixed greens. And I love that because it adds a little color to the greens. So I get a little bit dark, because it turns a dark, dark pink when it's dry, almost purple. And then when the orange ones, I'll get that orange in there. So it's just nice. That video that published the other day about weights and measures. And I did want to say that, yeah, I do understand the metric system is actually really easy when it's just basically multiples of 10. The confusion for most people happens when you're talking conversion. When you were raised learning this one, then it's like, okay, I have to know how to convert. I mean, off the top of my head, I do know that a liter is about 1.3 ounces, is that right? Bigger than a quart. So, because I think a liter is like 33 point something ounces, where a quart is 32 ounces. So it's usually the conversions that are frustrating, but metric itself is pretty simple. That's why I'm like, why didn't they just completely switch us over to metric? Because it does make more sense. And the thing about metric is that you can get, it's not like you can't do fractions of inches, which are used quite often, but a lot of times with your metric, and it comes to measurements, you're getting down to the milliliter, the millimeter. I mean, you can get down to smaller measurements that are a lot simpler and easier to get, if you're needing precision. I think the metric system is better. I mean, Patrick obviously uses both for when he's woodworking and stuff like that. Going off that whole idea of measurements, I think as long as you understand your basics. Somebody was talking about how it comes to baking, and then if they're reading something in metric or the other way around, and I think once you have just kind of a basic idea, it's like I hardly ever use precise measurements. And I think sometimes people, when they're baking, cooking, they think everything has to be precise. No, it doesn't. There's very few things that have to have absolute precision. Very few. When I first started baking pie crusts and breads and stuff, I remember I was like leveling off my measuring cup with a knife. Everything was precise. Those days are long gone. I just like, ba-doop, ba-doop, that looks good to me, and start mixing stuff together. I think I should add a little bit more of this or that or the other thing. I don't think anyone can claim to have a skill at cooking if they can't cook from their palate. There you go. In most cases, it does not have to be precise. And especially like the whole palate thing. If you can't, if somebody thinks that this has to have exactly this much garlic, well, I can tell you right now, as an Italian, if it says X amount of garlic, it's never enough. Question: do you have a favorite sun lotion that you make? No. You mean like, are you talking about like for a sunblock or something, or sun protection? No, but I do have a video on natural sunscreens if people need that. I don't use sunscreens. Obviously, like most of you who follow me should know that sunscreens that you buy at the store, unless you know for certain are all natural, they're usually terrible. And unless you burn really easy, and that's something to be, or easily, and that's something you need to be concerned about, I would say nix the sunscreen, because you need the sun, first of all. Now, if you do burn easily, maybe you have Nordic descent and very, very pale skin, then you need to be looking at, I suggest you go look up my video, and I give a few different ideas in there. Now, one of the things I know I talk about is the best thing for your skin is just a proper diet. Believe it or not, when you're eating properly and getting all your nutrients the way you're supposed to get them, your skin that burns easily, well, it could be that you're just very pale. But a lot of times it can also be that you're not getting enough nutrients. So sunscreen, sun protection happens just as much from the inside out as from the outside in. My one tomato plant is getting bushy and up to the second rung of the cage. Should I be breaking the leaves off? That's really up to you. I tie, like I said, we have those wooden slats that go across, and I just tie them up to that. And then as the plant grows, I just kind of wrap that tie around as it goes up it. And I just look for whatever leaves look like they're touching the ground, the base leaves, and I start breaking those off. And as the leaves get bigger and they'll start hanging down, I just use that as my guideline. And especially as the leaves get big, you got all this energy going into the leaves, and what you're wanting is the energy going into creating the tomatoes themselves. Oh, the third reason is that as you break those leaves off, you're getting more airflow around the plant. It's going to be better for it. Especially ours, since I put a lot of plants in there and they're in a greenhouse. I need airflow in there. It's really important I keep the airflow in there. So I do have a fan on right now. So hot days, turn the fan on, turn it on high on really hot days, open up the door. And if it starts looking a little too crowded, start breaking off more of those leaves so more sun can get in there and more airflow can get through there. So there's actually 3 reasons why you want to break those leaves off, especially starting from the bottom and then working your way up the plant. But you also want to leave some leaves on there, enough leaves that it's also collecting the sunlight. And if you're in areas that get really, really hot, so since my tomatoes are in the greenhouse, there are still some days that it can get so hot that it doesn't matter if I watered it really good in the morning. And even if the soil is still pretty wet, in the middle of the day and when it's really hot, it can cause those leaves to start wilting. Or cucumbers, same thing. And I find it, people say you shouldn't spray water on top of your tomato plants. I'm thinking, well, tomatoes grow out in the rain. But I will spray water onto the plants, and immediately the wiltiness, they'll just within a few minutes, it's like, that feels better, because the leaves will also absorb moisture into the plant. And so if you find on really hot days you have leaves of any of your vegetation that's starting to wilt, just spray them down with water. You don't have to soak them, just spray them down and then check them in just a few minutes and you'll see a difference. I am just one that I don't like to put a lot of money and energy into something unless it's absolutely necessary when it comes to growing a garden. Because I think about the fact that things grow out in nature in their own little environments quite well with very little concern about all these little things we worry about so much. Obviously, there's things that we can do to increase the production. So this is why I'm going to tie my tomatoes up rather than let them just kind of grow all over the ground. On top of that, I really don't want them all over the ground, but that's what they'll do out in nature. They'll just sprawl. Pumpkin, squash, anything that vines, yes, I prefer to have something for them to climb up to get them off the ground, and it will help them produce more. But when it comes to products that you have to apply, even the natural stuff, I try to avoid having to rely on a lot of that, especially if I can't get it. What if it comes down to a point where, I can't get blood meal, which I don't use that often. Well, I have other things I can use that I always have handy. So blood meal is something you would add to your acidic loving plants, like your berries, your corn, anything that loves an acidic soil. I only was getting it mostly for the sake of my blueberries when I still had them all in pots. Now my blueberries are all going to be in the ground. I'm not as concerned about it. But just because something in pots isn't as likely to get as much nutrients, and so, you're not always changing out the soil or whatever, so it's good to add back to it somehow. But I can still add chicken manure or chicken bedding to any of this stuff. So I'll probably never I'll probably never buy blood meal again once I finally use up what I have, because it's something I don't want to be dependent on. That's one of the reasons why it's like, okay, I'm kind of so done with the roses. I love roses, but I don't want something I have to keep babysitting and keep having to tend to. And, oh, you poor little delicate thing, you've got fungus again. I'm going to, and neem oil is expensive. It's not cheap. And even though you don't need that much, you just need maybe a couple tablespoons or so in a gallon of water. Still, it's expensive. And I just try to look at, well, then how about I stick to growing things that can have a similar or same purpose and get rid of the stuff that needs babysitting all the time. Because ain't nobody got time for that. Love y'all. Thanks for stopping in. Take care. And God bless.